My stepdad installed a camera pointing at my bedroom window. At first, I believed it was to protect me from the man next door. At least, that was what he told me. But then, I noticed something strange. The lens wasn't angled toward the street. It wasn't even focused on the backyard. It was tilted upward slightly, just enough to capture the second-story window of my bedroom. My window. The first time I felt truly exposed, I was in the middle of changing clothes. I had just come home from school. I remember closing the door, locking it like I always did, and pulling off my uniform shirt. That day, the sunlight hit the glass at just the right angle. I saw it a small red flicker, a light almost like a blinking eye. At first, I thought I imagined it, but when I stepped closer and looked out, I saw the camera. Mounted neatly on the eaves of the house, hidden behind a hanging plant, staring directly at me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the blinds shut so fast I nearly tore them off the wall. My heart pounded. I waited for him to come home to ask him to make it make sense, and he did, smoothly, casually. He walked in with a bag of groceries and said, "Oh, that thing, that's to keep an eye on Thomas. You know the creepy guy next door. You're almost 17 now, sweetheart. I'm just being careful." It sounded reasonable, on the surface. But why would a camera meant to monitor a neighbor point directly at my room? I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe that someone was finally watching out for me. After all, my real dad was gone. My mother was always tired, distracted. Jeff had stepped in. He paid the bills. He smiled at our neighbors. He brought home pizza every Friday and asked me how school was going. He had been in our lives since I was 11. Everyone said I was lucky to have a man like that, a stepdad who cared, who protected. But protection didn't feel like this. Protection didn't make my skin crawl. Protection didn't watch me undress from a hidden angle. Protection didn't feel like being hunted by someone wearing a family man's mask. That was the moment I realized I might be in more danger from the person living in my house than from the quiet man next door. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny blinking light was the beginning of everything unraveling. The lies, the betrayal, the truth about Jeff, about my mother, about who really needed protecting, and who I would have to become to survive it all. My name is Elena. I turned 16 last month, but I've felt older for years. Maybe it's because I had to grow up fast. My real dad died in a car accident when I was 9. After that, my mom fell apart quietly. Not the screaming kind of grief, just the slow kind that seeps into everything. She stopped laughing. She stopped watching my dance recitals. She stopped noticing things. That's when Jeff appeared. He was our landlord at first. He owned the small group of mobile homes on the edge of town where we lived. He used to bring by maintenance supplies, joke with Mom about broken light bulbs, and compliment her cooking even when we were just microwaving frozen lasagna. He had this calm, controlled voice that made people feel safe. Or maybe just small. He moved in with us a year later. My mom said it was the best thing that ever happened to her. She started wearing makeup again. She smiled more. She called Jeff our second chance. I called him Jeff, never Dad. He didn't seem to mind. He called me kiddo or sweetheart like it was a favor. At first he was helpful. He fixed my bike chain. He drove me to school when it rained. He taught me how to patch a tire and check the oil in our old sedan. But there was always something off. A slowness in the way his eyes moved over me. A tightness in his smile when he said, "You're growing up fast." By the time I was 13, he started enforcing rules my mom didn't make. No closed doors, no sleepovers, no crop tops. He said it was for my safety. My mom didn't argue. She never really argued with Jeff. He had a way of ending conversations without raising his voice. And over time, I stopped trying. I became quieter, more careful. I kept my drawings in a locked box under my bed. I deleted texts from friends after I read them. I learned how to lie with a straight face. I wasn't allowed to date, but boys at school still talked to me. Jeff would ask for names. He'd joke about how he'd meet them at the door with a baseball bat. But the bat wasn't a joke. It leaned in the corner of the hallway next to his boots. Always. My mom thought he was being protective. I started to think he just liked control. By 16, I had 2 escape plans memorized. One through the front door, one out the back window. I kept a flashlight under my pillow. Not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I was afraid of what might walk in when the house went quiet. Still, I tried to convince myself I was safe. That maybe he really did mean well. That maybe I was the problem. Overreacting. Hypervigilant. Traumatized, maybe. But then Thomas moved in next door. And Jeff changed. Subtly at first. He started locking the gates at night. He told my mom that Thomas gave him a bad feeling, that we needed extra precautions. That was when the camera appeared. When I asked about it, he said just in case, just to make sure Thomas wasn't peeking into my window. But I had never seen Thomas look at our house. Not once. He barely left his own porch. He walked his dog early in the morning and late at night. He kept to himself. He wasn't the one watching me. Jeff was. It started on a Thursday. I remember because it was laundry night and Mom always did laundry on Thursdays while humming those old country songs she liked. I was in my room pretending to study, though really I was drawing. It was the only thing that calmed my brain, sketching in lines and shadows, trying to make sense of things on paper. I had the blinds half open to catch the last of the daylight. That was when I saw him. Thomas. He was sitting on his front porch reading. His dog, a big gray shepherd, was lying next to him, alert but calm. I glanced at them, then went back to drawing. Not even 5 minutes later, Jeff knocked on my door. He didn't wait for me to say anything. He just opened it and stood there holding his phone. "You see that," he said, holding up the screen to show me the live camera feed. It was my window, and on the other side of the glass, you could just barely make out the figure of Thomas sitting outside. "He's watching you," Jeff said. I blinked. "No, he's not," I replied quietly. "He's reading." Jeff's smile tightened. "Reading. Huh?" With his back straight and eyes fixed toward your window. "That's not reading. That's scouting." I said nothing. He walked into the room slowly, still holding the phone. "I installed this camera for your protection, you know. I need to see what he's up to. You're at that age, Elena. Men like him, they notice girls like you. You need to be careful." I didn't like the way he said that. I didn't like the way he was still standing in my room between me and the door. I wanted to ask him to leave, but my voice got stuck. After a moment, he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I didn't go back to drawing. I didn't go back to anything. I just sat there staring at the spot where he had been standing. That night, I tried to close my blinds fully, but they were stuck. The cord had snapped. I used a towel and thumbtacks to block the window. Jeff noticed the next morning. He came in while I was brushing my hair. He didn't knock, just stepped in and said, "Why'd you cover the window?" I said the blinds were broken. He smiled again, that cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want Thomas thinking you're hiding something, do you?" The way he said it made me want to scream. That weekend, Jeff announced he was installing another camera. This one would go inside in the hallway outside my bedroom door. He called it an extra layer of protection. When I asked why we needed more cameras, he told me that Thomas had been standing closer to our fence, maybe trying to find a blind spot. I didn't see that happen. I never saw Thomas near our yard. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. What could I say? Every time I opened my mouth, Jeff had an answer ready. Calm, measured, reasonable. On Sunday night, I stayed up late drawing again. I kept the lights off and the towel over the window. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I held my breath. My door was shut but not locked. Jeff had removed the lock a year ago, saying locked doors created secrecy, and he didn't want secrets in this house. The handle turned. I jumped out of bed and pulled the door open before he could. Jeff blinked, surprised. "Just checking that you're safe," he said, looking past me into the room. I forced a smile. "I'm fine." He didn't move. "You should sleep earlier," he said. Then, as if it were nothing, he added, "You never know who's watching." I shut the door before he could say anything else, and I sat on the floor until the sun came up. Over the next week, things started changing in small, insidious ways. The hallway camera blinked red every time I passed by, and Jeff began referencing things I hadn't told him, things he should not have known. He would casually mention the book I had been reading the night before, or comment on how I paced in my room when I was upset. I never told him any of that. He always said it with a smile like it was proof of how much he cared, but I started to feel like I was being watched in ways that went far beyond normal concern. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table flipping through a magazine when Jeff sat across from me and placed a small, neatly folded package in front of me. "Open it," he said, nodding at the box. I hesitated. "Go on, sweetheart. It's just something I thought you'd like." I opened it slowly. Inside was a bikini. A very small, very revealing red bikini. I stared at it, not speaking. "We're going to set up the inflatable pool this weekend, remember? Figured you'd need something new to wear." He smiled. I didn't. I felt like throwing it in the trash, but I knew better than to make a scene. Instead, I thanked him and went back to my room, clutching the box like it was a ticking bomb. That night, I saw Thomas outside again. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just fixing a loose board on his porch. But Jeff stormed in and started ranting to my mother about how Thomas was trying to get a look at me. He said the bikini was proof we needed to block the fence. He was talking so fast and so loud that Mom just nodded. She rarely disagreed with him. Later, when she brought me dinner in my room, I asked her gently if she thought Jeff might be overreacting. She looked tired, older than I remembered. "He's just trying to keep you safe, honey. I know he can be intense, but his heart is in the right place." I wanted to believe her. I wanted someone to tell me I was imagining things, but my gut said otherwise. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. I was sitting on my bed sketching when I heard the soft mechanical click of a camera zooming. I looked toward the window. There was no red light this time, just silence. I turned off my bedroom light and crept to the window, pulling the towel aside just enough to peek. The camera was pointed even higher now, perfectly aligned with where my bed sat against the wall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was being stripped of every layer of privacy. Every time I moved, I wondered who was watching, who was recording, and why. I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. Telling Mom again would lead nowhere. Confronting Jeff was dangerous. My friends didn't know anything was wrong. But then I remembered Thomas. The man Jeff hated. The man everyone said was creepy. He had barely spoken to me since he moved in, but he always nodded when we passed each other. He always looked away quickly like he didn't want to make me uncomfortable. Maybe that was the point. Maybe he wasn't the one I should fear. Maybe he was the only one who'd noticed what Jeff was doing. And maybe, just maybe, he was the only one who might believe me. The next morning, I waited until Jeff left for work before approaching my mom. She was in the kitchen sipping her usual mug of weak coffee and scrolling through her phone. I stood there for a while, gathering the courage to speak until she finally looked up and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" she asked. I hesitated. "Mom, I think Jeff is lying to us." She blinked, then set her mug down. "What are you talking about?" "About the cameras," I said quietly. "They're not about Thomas. They're about me. I think he's watching me." Her face changed. She didn't look shocked. She looked annoyed. "Elena, don't start." "I'm serious," I insisted. "The camera outside my window, it's aimed directly at my bed. And the one in the hallway records everything I do. He keeps mentioning things he shouldn't know." She waved her hand. "He's just looking out for you. That man next door gives him a bad feeling, and frankly, he gives me one too. Always lurking, always pretending to be nice." I stepped closer. "No, Mom. Thomas isn't the problem. Jeff is. You don't see it because he hides it from you. But I see it. I feel it. Every time he walks into my room without knocking. Every time he says something that makes my skin crawl." My voice cracked. "He bought me a bikini. It was small, Mom. Inappropriate. He said it was for the pool, but I've never even wanted to swim." Her eyes hardened. "Jeff told me you've been acting out, that you've been watching that man too much. He said you were getting confused, maybe even obsessed." Her words hit me like a slap. I felt cold all over. "You believe him over me." Her voice softened, but not in a kind way. "Elena, sweetheart, you've always had a vivid imagination. You're 16. Your body's changing. Men, look. It's not Jeff's fault." I stared at her horrified. "You think this is about hormones, that I'm making this up?" She sighed and stood up, brushing crumbs off her pants. "You're too old to be this dramatic. Jeff provides for us. He works hard. He loves us. and he's trying to protect you. That's all. Don't twist it into something ugly." I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see. Instead, I turned and left the room. My mom didn't follow. That night, I locked my bedroom door with a chair wedged beneath the knob. I knew it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted in, but it gave me a sliver of control. I lay awake for hours listening to the house settle to the creaks in the hallway. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps. I held my breath until they faded. In the morning, the chair was slightly moved, just enough for me to know it hadn't been my imagination. When I confronted Mom again, she told me I must have forgotten how I left it, that maybe I sleepwalked, that maybe I needed rest. I stopped talking to her after that. At least about Jeff. If she wouldn't believe me, then she wasn't safe. She wasn't on my side. I was alone, until I found the note in the mailbox. It was a Sunday afternoon when Jeff left the house to run errands. My mom was out with friends, something she rarely did, but claimed she needed for her sanity. I was alone, and I knew I wouldn't get another opportunity like this. Jeff's laptop was usually locked in his office drawer, but that day he must have forgotten. I had watched him type his password enough times to memorize the pattern. My heart raced as I opened it and entered the password. It worked. The screen blinked to life. For a few minutes, I just stared at the desktop, unsure of what I was looking for. Then I saw a folder labeled Home Security buried under layers of other folders. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled with dates and times. I opened one. It was grainy nighttime footage from the camera outside my bedroom window. I skipped ahead. The timestamp showed 11:52 p.m. The camera was zoomed in tight. Through the thin curtains, I could just barely make out my silhouette moving around the room. The camera wasn't aimed at Thomas. It was never aimed at him. I clicked on another video. This one was clearer. I had forgotten to close the towel over the window that night. I watched as my own image undressed. My stomach turned. I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't scream. I moved mechanically. I reopened the computer and copied several files onto a flash drive I kept for school projects. I didn't take all of them, just enough. Enough to prove what I had seen. I tucked the drive inside a hollowed-out art supply canister and shoved it into my backpack. When Jeff returned an hour later, I was sitting at the table pretending to do math homework. He tousled my hair and asked if I wanted pizza for dinner. I nodded. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and counted each breath. I knew I couldn't stay quiet much longer, but I also knew that if I confronted him directly, I would lose. He was too good at lying, too practiced, too powerful in this house. The next morning, I saw Thomas watering his plants. I walked slowly past the edge of our yard and dropped my sketch pad into the recycling bin on our side of the fence. He noticed. Later that evening, the sketch pad was back on my porch. Tucked between the pages was a small note, handwritten in blocky letters. "If you're in danger, I can help." I stared at the note for a long time. Then I wrote one back. "Meet me at the back gate. Midnight." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. That night, I waited until the house was dark and still. I crept outside, my shoes in my hand. I reached the back gate at 12:01. He was already there, standing just beyond the property line with his dog. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I just held out the flash drive. He didn't touch it. He said, "I believe you." Then he asked one question. "Are you ready to fight back?" I didn't speak. I nodded. It was all I could do. Thomas didn't ask for details that night. He didn't press me with questions or react with the shock I expected. Instead, he simply said, "I've seen him watching you. I've been keeping notes." I remember the way his voice sounded. Flat calm, but filled with something heavier, like he had been waiting for me to come forward. We sat behind the fence, hidden by the overgrowth, his dog lying at our feet. I finally asked him the thing that had been bothering me since all of this began. "Why me? Why were you watching our house?" Thomas rubbed his hands together. "Years ago, I lived in a different town, different neighborhood. My wife and I were going through a divorce, and it got ugly. She said things that weren't true, claimed I was dangerous. I lost custody of my daughter, all because I didn't have proof to fight back." He looked at me then. I know what it's like to be seen as a threat when you're the one trying to protect someone. That's what Jeff is doing now, turning you into the liar before you can expose him." I nodded slowly. He handed me a small notebook. Inside were pages of detailed notes, times, dates, observations. He had been documenting Jeff's behavior for weeks. Photographs taken from his kitchen window, images showing Jeff installing the cameras, notes on how Jeff always lingered near my room when my mom was out. It was more than I had ever hoped for. "We need more than this," Thomas said. "What you gave me is strong, but we need something undeniable. Physical proof, video, something he can't explain away." I told him about the hallway camera and how Jeff had recently adjusted its angle. Thomas suggested I use my phone to record Jeff's movements during the night. I didn't like the idea. The thought of capturing what I feared might happen made my stomach twist. But I knew he was right. The next few nights, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled at dinner. I asked about my mom's day. I thanked Jeff for fixing my lamp. But each night, I set my phone on silent camera facing the door recording. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there listening, waiting. On the third night, something happened. At 2:47 a.m., my door creaked open. I stayed perfectly still. I heard footsteps cross the carpet, the faint rustle of fabric, the sound of someone breathing too close. Then the door shut again. I waited until dawn before checking the video. The footage wasn't clear, but it was enough. A shadow moving across the room, a figure leaning over my bed, the shape of Jeff's frame unmistakable. I transferred the file to a second flash drive and gave it to Thomas that evening. He didn't say anything, he just nodded. Then he told me he had contacted someone, a lawyer who specialized in child protection cases, someone who didn't work in our county, someone Jeff couldn't influence. Things were beginning to shift, but Jeff wasn't stupid. He knew something was off. The next day, he started asking me strange questions. "Have you been talking to Thomas? Did you go outside last night? You've been acting different. Are you okay?" I lied. I told him I had the flu, that I was stressed from school, that I was just tired. He didn't push, but his eyes didn't leave mine. That night, I checked my backpack. The flash drive was missing. I had kept the second one in a secret pocket, but it was gone. I searched everywhere. Nothing. I realized then that he had searched my things, that he knew I was hiding something, and that whatever came next would not be subtle. The day after I discovered the flash drive was missing, Thomas asked me to come by his place under the pretense of delivering a package. It was his way of making sure Jeff wouldn't get suspicious if he saw us talking. I walked over casually, pretending to hold a brown envelope, and stepped into Thomas's small, dim living room. He closed the door gently and motioned for me to sit. He had something to show me, a thin stack of papers slightly worn with staples in the corner. "It's his history," Thomas said quietly. I didn't understand at first. Then I looked at the top page. It was a police report. Jeffrey Morrison. Allegation of inappropriate conduct. The date was nearly a decade ago. The name of the school was unfamiliar, but the words weren't. Inappropriate touching. A female student. No charges filed due to lack of evidence. Settled internally. The next page showed a summary of a court deposition. Jeff had been accused by another girl, this time during his job at a summer camp. Again, nothing stuck. No conviction. But there were patterns, allegations, withdrawn complaints. Every time Jeff moved, changed jobs, changed neighborhoods, rebranded himself. "That's how men like him survive," Thomas said. "They wear good guy masks and rely on people not wanting to believe the worst." He looked tired, older than before, but determined. "Your mom might know," he added. "Some of this is public record. If she doesn't, it means she didn't look. If she does, it means she chose to ignore it. Either way, it's not good." I sat there with the papers in my lap, my hands trembling. All this time, I thought I was alone in what I felt. But now, I knew I wasn't the first. And if I didn't speak up, I wouldn't be the last. "We need to move quickly," Thomas said. "If he found your flash drive, he knows you're gathering evidence. He'll escalate." I nodded. I didn't have the words to explain the fear in my chest. That night, I avoided Jeff as much as I could. I stayed in my room, headphones on sketchbook open, but untouched. Around midnight, I heard him in the hallway. The floorboards creaked under his weight. I turned off my lights and pretended to sleep. He didn't come in, but he stood at the door for a long time, just breathing, listening. I could feel it. The next morning, everything changed. Jeff made breakfast. Bacon, eggs, pancakes. He smiled too much, asked too many questions. You sleep okay? You feeling better? You know you can talk to me about anything, right? His tone was gentle, but it didn't comfort me. It chilled me. I left the house as soon as I could and went straight to Thomas. We printed everything, all the reports, all the evidence, and mailed copies to the lawyer. We made backups, hid flash drives in multiple locations, even gave one to a neighbor Thomas trusted. It wasn't just about protecting me anymore. It was about getting ahead of what Jeff might try next. That evening, Mom got home early. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. She pulled me aside and whispered, "Jeff said you've been lying, that you've been sneaking around with Thomas, that he's filling your head with things." I looked at her and asked, "Did you ever look him up? Did you ever check his past?" She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. She had chosen him, again, and I would have to choose myself. After that conversation with my mother, I stopped waiting for her to change sides. It was clear she wouldn't. Whatever love she had for Jeff had blinded her beyond reason. So I turned inward and focused on survival. Thomas and I created a plan. We would document everything, every movement, every pattern, and every slip Jeff made. I began keeping a journal hidden in the lining of my mattress, writing down every detail I remembered from the last 5 years, starting from the smallest inappropriate touches disguised as affection to the nights he hovered outside my door. Thomas installed a discreet camera inside a vent near my room. He taught me how to turn it on manually, only when necessary to avoid detection. Meanwhile, the lawyer he contacted in the next county started piecing together a timeline using what we had gathered. I stayed quiet at home, compliant. Even so, Jeff wouldn't suspect anything. I smiled at the dinner table, complimented his pancakes, and asked about his job. At night, I cried silently under the covers, rage and helplessness burning inside me. The hardest part was pretending not to flinch when he walked past me, not to stiffen when he touched my shoulder, not to scream when he leaned too close. But there was power in silence, too, in knowing the truth and watching someone lie while you quietly built their downfall. Then, one day, Thomas handed me an envelope. Inside was a series of still shots from the vent camera. Clear images of Jeff opening my door at 2:16 a.m., stepping halfway inside and staring toward my bed. No flashlight, no call for me, no reason. Just watching. The look on his face in those pictures made my blood run cold. "That's enough," the lawyer said. "Enough to get a judge to listen." But we needed someone with authority to present it, someone neutral. That's when Thomas introduced me to Mrs. Lacey, a retired social worker who had known him since he returned from Iraq. She had helped him once when he was wrongly accused during his custody battle. She believed in facts, and she believed in victims. When she saw the photos, she went pale, then nodded. "We'll get you out, but we have to be smart." We filed a preliminary report under her name. She contacted the state police instead of the local ones, knowing that Jeff's connections in our town ran deep. We created a backup plan in case things went wrong. A signal. If I ever mouthed the words "red apple" to anyone, it meant I was in immediate danger. Thomas would wait outside, close enough to help, far enough to avoid the restraining order Jeff had filed against him based on fabricated claims. One evening, I overheard Jeff on the phone in the living room. He was speaking low, but I caught enough to know he was planning something. He mentioned erasing things, reformatting, covering tracks. I told Thomas. That same night, we smuggled out the hard drive from one of Jeff's office drawers. The next morning, he noticed. He asked me if I had touched his things. I said no. He stared at me too long, like he was deciding whether to believe me. Later, I found my backpack slashed open. Nothing else was missing. Just a warning. I didn't react. Didn't give him the satisfaction. But I slept with my sneakers on that night just in case I needed to run. I was done hoping things would magically get better. Now I was preparing for the storm. It happened faster than we expected. One morning, I walked into school and was called into the guidance counselor's office before I even reached my locker. She looked at me with that tight smile adults wear when they think they know something you don't. Elena, she said gently, we've received some concerning reports. I sat down slowly, my pulse already rising. What kind of reports, I asked. She folded her hands on her desk. Someone anonymously sent us photos of you with Mr. Thomas. They claim he's been manipulating you, possibly grooming. My heart dropped. I knew immediately what Jeff had done. He had faked images or twisted moments to look worse than they were. I shook my head. That's not true. Thomas has done nothing wrong. He's the only one who's tried to help me. She didn't believe me. Her eyes softened the way people look at someone they've already decided is broken. I know this is hard to hear, Elena. Sometimes when adults get too close, it can confuse us, especially if we've been through trauma. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam her desk and tell her that Jeff was the predator, that she was protecting the wrong man. But I knew it wouldn't help. Jeff had moved first. He had poisoned the well. The photos weren't just at school. By the time I got home, my mother was waiting in the living room with tear-streaked cheeks. Jeff sat beside her, rubbing her back. She stood up as soon as she saw me. "What have you done?" she said. "What lies has Thomas put in your head?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Jeff raised his hand gently. "Let her talk," he said. "Let her explain why she's been sneaking out at night, why she's been feeding stories to that man." I stared at him. He was calm, polished. The victim. My mother turned on me before I could speak. "I believed you," she whispered. "When you said he was watching you, I believed you for a second. But now I see it. You're just like your father, always twisting the truth, always chasing drama." I flinched. Jeff didn't even look surprised. He just nodded. "She's confused. Teenagers sometimes latch on to outsiders when they feel misunderstood. It's normal. We'll get her help." I ran to my room and locked the door. I grabbed my emergency kit, the one Thomas helped me put together. The flash drive, my drawings, a printed copy of the police reports, and a burner phone he had given me just in case. I texted the code to Thomas. 2 words, red apple. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had to be ready. That night, Jeff tried to come into my room again, but this time I was standing in the middle of the floor, facing the door, holding my phone with the camera recording. He paused when he saw me. His smile faltered. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked. I didn't answer, just kept the camera pointed at him. He backed away slowly and closed the door. The next morning, officers from Child Protective Services came to our door. Not the local police, not Jeff's friends, state agents. They asked to speak to me privately. My mom protested. Jeff tried to charm them, but they insisted. I showed them everything, the photos, the videos, the files. I told them everything, about the cameras, about the nights, about the threats. They listened, really listened, and then they told me to pack a bag. I was going somewhere safe. As I left, Jeff stood in the doorway, jaw clenched. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." They took me to a safe house run by the state, a small 2-bedroom building outside the city with locked gates and guarded entries. The rooms were plain but clean, and the staff were kind in the way people are when they've seen too many versions of the same story. I stayed there for 3 days while the social workers gathered more evidence and interviewed witnesses. I didn't see my mom during that time. I didn't want to. But on the 4th day, they told me she had requested a visit. Part of me hoped she had changed her mind, that maybe seeing everything laid bare had broken through the fog. I sat in the visitation room, legs bouncing under the table, heart pounding. When she walked in, I knew immediately. She wasn't here for me. Her face was tense, her eyes hard. She sat down, slowly looked me over, then said, "You're destroying our lives." I flinched. She leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to Jeff? To me? Do you think anyone's going to hire him again after this? Do you think we'll be able to stay in our home?" I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "He hurt me," I said. "He watched me. He came into my room." She waved her hand like swatting away an insect. "You don't know what you're saying." "You always had a vivid imagination." I opened my mouth to speak, but she cut me off. "Thomas filled your head with lies. He's been grooming you, Elena. Don't you see that This is what predators do. They find girls like you, lonely, angry, vulnerable. They make you think you're victims when you're not. My throat tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I reached into my folder and pulled out one of the photographs Jeff standing in my doorway at 2 in the morning. I slid it across the table. Her eyes flicked to it, then away. "That proves nothing," she muttered. "Just a concerned father checking on his daughter." My voice trembled. "You know that's not true. You felt it. You saw it." She shook her head. "I won't testify against him. I won't let you ruin everything we've built." I stood up. "Then you're choosing him." Again. She stood too. "I'm choosing stability. I'm choosing family." She walked out without another word. The social worker came in a few minutes later, her face unreadable. I told her everything. About my mom. About how she had always chosen the easiest truth over the hardest one. That night I cried for the first time in weeks. Not because of Jeff, but because I realized the person who was supposed to protect me had become just another wall I had to break through. Thomas called the next morning. His voice was quiet. "She made her choice, didn't she?" he said. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Then we keep going," he said. "We keep fighting. For you. For the others. We're not done yet." I believed him, because unlike my mother, he never asked me to pretend. It was a week later when the plan took shape. Thomas had been working with the lawyer and Mrs. Lacey coordinating with state officers behind the scenes. They knew Jeff was building a defense, spinning the narrative using my mother as his mouthpiece. Rumors had already started spreading through the neighborhood. Thomas was dangerous. I was a troubled teen manipulated by an older man. My mom was a victim trying to protect me. It was the same pattern Jeff had used before in other towns, but this time we had proof. Still, proof wasn't enough. We needed action. We needed timing. So we created a distraction. The Johnsons, an older couple living 3 houses down from us, agreed to help. Their house had been having electrical issues for weeks, and Thomas, who used to work in mechanical engineering, offered to help fix it. Instead, he made sure a small fuse would blow at the exact right time, creating smoke but not danger. Enough to trigger an emergency response. The fire department came fast, sirens flashing lights, neighbors flooding into the street. In the chaos, I was escorted out of the safe house under a new pretext, an urgent medical checkup. Instead, I was driven straight to Thomas's car, parked 3 blocks away. He was already inside, eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. We drove in silence until we reached the neighborhood. The smoke had caused mild panic, people shouting, kids crying, hoses spraying water over the Johnsons' kitchen. Jeff was standing on our porch, talking to a firefighter, pretending to be helpful. My mother was next to him holding her phone, eyes darting around. I slipped out of the car and joined the group of neighbors gathering across the street. No one noticed me at first. Everyone was distracted. I made my way around the block, heart pounding, until I reached Mrs. Lacey's house. She opened the door before I could knock. "Nathaniel's inside," she said. "Everything's ready." I stepped in. The lawyer was at the table sorting documents. A woman I didn't recognize sat beside her. She stood when she saw me. "Judge Hawkins," she said from family court. "I've read everything. We're issuing the emergency order today. You'll be safe." My knees went weak. They helped me sit, handed me water. Outside, I heard shouting. Jeff had seen me. He was trying to push past the firefighter, pointing, yelling. Thomas stepped between them, holding up his phone. "Don't take another step," he warned. "You're violating the restraining order." Jeff growled something I couldn't hear, but he backed off. Judge Hawkins opened the front door and walked toward them. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "you've been served. Your presence is no longer requested in this child's life." Jeff's eyes widened. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he snapped. "You're all insane. This is kidnapping." "No, sir," the officer said, stepping out of an unmarked car behind him. "This is court-ordered protection, and you are under arrest." They cuffed him before he could protest. My mother screamed, lunging toward them. "She's lying. He never touched her. He's a good man. He's my husband." The judge turned to her. "Then you can explain that to the state prosecutor." "You're being charged as an accessory." The world tilted. I watched as both of them were loaded into separate police vehicles. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear anymore, but from disbelief. It was over. Not the healing, not the court trials, but the hiding, the pretending, the silence. For the first time, I could breathe without watching my back. I was free. The days that followed felt like a storm breaking after years of quiet suffocation. News spread fast, faster than we anticipated. The footage we had collected, the testimonies, the evidence of Jeff's past misconduct and manipulation were submitted to the state investigators. The officers involved weren't from our county. They had no stake in Jeff's reputation, no loyalty to local gossip. They saw the evidence for what it was. The story hit local news within 48 hours. A beloved stepfather and community volunteer arrested for abuse surveillance and witness intimidation. A mother charged for failing to protect her daughter. It shocked people. People who had waved to Jeff on their morning walks. Parents who had trusted him around their children. Teachers who believed his polite voice and buttoned-up composure. For a moment, there was silence from the neighborhood. Then the whispers started, some in support, some still skeptical. But they no longer mattered. The truth was out. I was moved to a foster home just outside the city, a quiet place with kind people who didn't ask too many questions. Thomas stayed in contact every day. His daughters, who had returned to live with him now that the court reopened his custody case, sent me drawings and letters calling me their big sister. Judge Hawkins oversaw both our cases. She expedited the emergency protection orders and ensured that Jeff had no means to contact me, no way to twist the narrative any further. But Jeff didn't go down quietly. Through his lawyer, he tried to present an alternative version of the story, that Thomas was the manipulator, that I was confused, that my accusations were retaliation for discipline. But the surveillance videos, the camera footage from my bedroom, the handwritten logs from Thomas, and the testimonies from other women who had known Jeff in previous towns crushed his defense. In court, I testified. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I stood in a room full of strangers, lawyers, and my mother, who refused to look at me and described every detail. My hands shook, my voice faltered, but I didn't stop. I owed that to the girl I used to be, the one who sat awake night after night, terrified, ashamed, silenced. Jeff sat at the defendant's table with that same smug expression, the one he wore the night I first questioned the camera outside my window. But as I spoke, I saw it crack. When the jury saw the footage, silent, grainy, undeniable, I saw heads turn away. People couldn't bear to look. The trial lasted a week. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced Jeff to 25 years without parole. My mother received a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole after 18 months. As they were led away in handcuffs, she finally looked at me, not with remorse, not with sorrow, but with resentment, as if I had stolen something from her. I didn't flinch. I had nothing left to prove. After court, Thomas waited outside with his daughters. They hugged me like family. Mrs. Lacey stood nearby, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "We did. Because the truth may not always shout, but when it finally speaks, it cannot be ignored." The weeks after the trial felt like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't constantly scanning every room for danger, where I could sleep without wedging a chair against the door, where I could look out my window without fear of being watched. My foster family, the Harrisons, were older, kind, and gentle in ways that didn't demand anything from me. They gave me space to breathe, space to cry, and space to start becoming a person who wasn't defined by what had happened. I began therapy twice a week with a trauma counselor who listened without judgment and never once questioned my story. For the first time in years, I felt like my words had weight. I started drawing again too, not out of fear or panic, but because it helped me process things I couldn't yet say out loud. Thomas and his daughters visited every Sunday. We would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. His daughters brought me stories from school jokes, little origami animals they had learned to fold. They called me Big Sis without hesitation, like the title had always belonged to me. One afternoon, Thomas looked at me while the girls were playing on the lawn. "You saved them too," he said. "You gave us the courage to fight again." I didn't know what to say. I had never thought of myself as brave. I had just been surviving. But maybe survival was a kind of courage too. Judge Hawkins officially granted Thomas full custody of his daughters. Their mother had disappeared after her charges were filed. The girls never asked about her. They were too busy learning how to feel safe again. My school adjusted too. After some initial whispers, most people stopped looking at me like I was fragile or strange. Some kids even apologized. One teacher, who had once dismissed my concerns, approached me in the hallway. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I failed you." I nodded. It was enough. Healing wasn't quick. I still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden noises, still struggled to trust people who smiled too easily. But every day felt a little more mine. I testified at several awareness events about recognizing abuse and the importance of believing children when they speak. The first time I stood on stage, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the microphone. But then I looked at the audience and saw a girl who looked just like I had, quiet, small, hiding in a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, and I kept going. Because someone needed to hear it. A year after the trial, the Harrisons asked if I wanted to stay with them permanently. "We don't want to replace your parents," Mrs. Harrison said. "But we'd be honored if you'd let us be your home." I said yes, without hesitation. On my 18th birthday, I legally changed my last name to theirs. That night, Thomas and the girls came over for cake. Mrs. Lacey brought a quilt she had made stitched with pieces of fabric representing each of us. "Family isn't always blood," she said as she wrapped it around my shoulders. "Sometimes it's the people who fight for you when no one else will." I looked around the room at my chosen family, at the people who had believed me when I had stopped believing in myself, and realized she was right. The past would always be part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I was not just a survivor. I was someone who stood up, who spoke out, who refused to be silenced, and that would always be enough.